Hello, 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 and welcome to the C-Suite Live. I am your host, Chelsea Cross, millennial marketing strategist, personal branding expert, and one of LinkedIn Learning's top performing instructors. And let me tell you, we have a loaded live stream today. It's going to be packed with so much goodness because my guest is a rock star. She's an absolute powerhouse. And today's conversation is not only something that I've personally been looking forward to, but I also personally believe is so necessary and relevant for everybody on the planet today. And speaking of the planet, happy Earth Day. I love Earth Day. It just reminds you of this incredible place that we get to call home. And hopefully we're all doing our part to make this planet a better place, even if you are just being mindful of your words, your actions, what you're recycling today. I hope it's another indicator of how lucky we are to live on planet Earth. And so without further ado, let me tell you a little bit about my rock star guest. Her name is Dorie Clark. If you have not heard about her, now you will, and you will never forget. We're talking about how to tackle tricky situations and communicate across cultures. Sounds like it's necessary today, right? It seems like a lot of people, whether they're political, whether they're celebrity, whether they're entertainment, influencer, people are getting their tongues tied with what words they're using and what language they're using, and we can all really be more mindful of our word choice, our language, so that we are empowering each other and mindful of our communication instead of offending people. Today, we're seeing people left and right dropping off the face of television or what feels like off of social media because they are not thinking before they tweet or thinking before they speak. And it's amazing how influential and powerful just our choice of words is today, especially in the climate that we're living in. So who is Dorie Clark? The person to have this conversation with, that's for sure. She's an expert in self-reinvention and helping others make changes in their lives, says the New York Times. She's a Duke and Columbia business professor. She's also a LinkedIn instructor, top performer. She's a top 50 business thinker in the world. And she's also rated #1 communication coach in the world. She won the Marshall Goldsmith Leading Global Coaches Award. So have I given you enough validation that this girl is a badass? Yes, I said it. I know, choice of words, but sometimes badass is necessary to define how badass somebody really is. So without further ado, let me bring on Dorie Clark. Dorie, thank you so much for joining us and being here today. I'm so excited for this conversation.
Hey, Chelsea, thank you so much. What a treat to be here with you.
So Dorie, I mean, what a year we're coming off of. And, you know, it kind of still feels like we're like in 2020 and a half, right? Like because of this ripple effect that 2020 is having on the world and on our lives, personally and professionally. And here on the C-Suite, we always like to talk about the personal and professional because, hey, that is the compilation of life, right? So we're talking about, you know, how to tackle tricky situations and communicate across cultures. How much more relevant has this topic been this year in particular, like, and than ever in your career?
Well, certainly it is something that is coming up all the time now. It's coming up because, for one thing, we are all, most of us at least, working virtually. And so therefore, there's really no difference. And so we are communicating with people and working with people in offices around the world, clients around the world. Before, when we were in an office, you were far more likely to be talking with the same people all the time. They were perhaps a more homogeneous group because, they all live in your city or something like that. Now, of course, Zoom was part of people's repertoire, but not at all in the way that it is now. So we are having far more international connections and relationships and opportunities for communication to sometimes go awry. And if you layer on top of it the social justice protests of 2020, there's a lot of potential for miscommunication around that as well. So communication has really come to the fore in 2020 and 2021.
And isn't it amazing how we all learn to speak so early in life, right? But there's a new awareness and a new demand, if you will, for us to rethink our words, to retake our communication and word choice into consideration. I mean, we see how many thought leaders or celebrities a week having to take a step back because of something they said that shot themselves in the foot, right? So talking about, tackling communication, there's a lot of conversation around communication, and also interpersonal communication, which is one of your top performing courses. But I think we kind of throw the term interpersonal communication around without really defining it, or maybe defining it as clearly as you can for us. So for those that are like, what is interpersonal communication? Can you define that for us right here, right now?
Sure. I mean, at a really basic level, it's just reaching out and expressing to other people what you need and what you are wanting them to know and do. It's about getting your message across effectively. And it sounds like it should be simple, but unfortunately, we probably all know from personal experience, it's not always the case. I mean, even in situations where you're dealing with people who speak the same language, it's not a language barrier. You speak English, they speak English, or whatever it is. There are still so many nuances. There's so many different questions where people might be assuming different intent. Words can be used in different ways. So it's something that we have to be cognizant of and really be perhaps more thoughtful than we have in the past.
Oh, 100%. And I just feel like constantly we're being reminded by these huge public figures, whether it was our former president, Donald Trump, or Nick Cannon, or Pierce Morgan, Sharon Osbourne, just a few of the more very current big figures whose choice of words has gotten them in a pickle or caused, confrontation amongst their workplace, but also in the social landscape. Right. And there is a lot going on today. So Dorie, in the global climate that we're currently living in, social injustice, political injustice, Black Lives Matter, anti-Asian, the hatred going on right now, which is just so heartbreaking, all of this crime that we are seeing, not just in verbal, but people taking some scary action. What is your, as an expert in communication today, for those of us who are team leaders, right, and leading the pack, what can we be taking action on today to make sure that we're setting the tone, that our leadership is on point when it comes to communication? Is it a pause moment for everyone to have workshops, skills leadership and development training? What should we be doing at this point?
Well, there's not one answer, of course, to it, and people are responding in a myriad of different ways. But my personal take on this is that we really need to be thinking about communications today in two different directions. The first is as leaders and as people just in general who are sending messages, we need to be as thoughtful as possible. And I don't mean thoughtful to the extent where, sometimes people might take it to an extreme and feel like, oh my gosh, every word is being policed and, oh, but if I say the wrong word, it's sort of stepping on eggshells. That's not a productive state of mind because you're going to feel paralyzed. You're going to feel restricted in some way. The main and most important thing is to just come from it from a perspective of, how do I say something in a way so that it has the greatest chance possible for the message I am trying to send to be the one that other people are receiving? If I'm saying it in a particular way, but there is a strong chance that that language will be heard in a different way that has connotations or overtones that I don't mean, then it's not very effective communication, frankly. The best communication is almost seamless. It's transparent because there's no distinction. There's no difference between what you intended to say and what the recipient actually hears from it. So just trying to think a little bit more and put ourselves into the shoes of the recipients so that your correct message can get across is important. And then on the flip side of it, Chelsea, I'd say that one of the things that often is lacking in our current culture is just the assumption of positive intent.
Mhm.
It's very rare. It's, it's not that it never happens, but it is generally very rare that someone is deliberately setting out to try to say something hurtful or offensive. And if they are, well, then fine, go after them. I mean, nobody should be doing that, and you can you can just take them. But the majority of the situations that we're finding, sometimes people sometimes are um, blundering their way into something, and I find it a little bit tragic where they're being really pilloried for things that may be unintentional, and it can create a climate where people are afraid to try to communicate from the heart. And so I think that we all just need to be thoughtful and really step back and try to understand a person's intent first, because it makes it a lot easier to have a productive conversation if you can meet them in that place.
And to that point, Dorie, I've been getting that question more than ever in my workshops and in my coaching sessions of, you know, I'm scared to share my opinion. I'm scared to post something that could be misconstrued. I'm scared of the comment section, right? What if somebody comes after me? How do I follow up to that? How do I respond to that? Do I delete something? Do I engage something? And I do think that if you are hesitant to post something, then maybe that is a moment to acknowledge that you need to take a pause and reevaluate what you do want to say and how you are saying it, so that you can make sure to say it in the best way, so that you are trying to get the actual message across versus your emotions getting the best of you in that moment, or making sure that you're using the correct word choice in that post. But what do you say as one of the number one communication coaches for those that are feeling a little bit paralyzed right now, and maybe saying nothing is better? What's your follow up to that?
Yeah, well, first of all, I mean, it's an unfortunate situation where anyone of any ideological persuasion feels afraid to voice opinions, assuming that they are not, meant to be hateful or hurtful opinions, but are just, stating how one feels or how one sees things. What I think is an important distinction is it's often useful to think. Often the discourse is kind of polarized about, well, I'm either going to speak my truth or I'm going to remain silent, or be silenced, to use the Meghan Markle distinction, right? I think that sometimes that might be too stark of a frame. I think sometimes a better question might be, well, where do you speak out? Because part of the problem with all of this is, frankly, social media, because that is a place where there is often not the most intellectual or thoughtful discourse about sensitive topics. And so social media, speaking out on social media oftentimes inherently means getting into flame wars if it's about certain topics. And you might, depending on what your goals are, I mean, if you want to get in a flame war, by all means, but if your goal is that you want to be engaging with friends or colleagues, it's often far more effective to do it in person or to do it in another venue where it's less likely for things to escalate and spiral out of control, and you sort of forget you're dealing with a human on the other end of the line.
That alone is such a great piece of advice and a takeaway. If you really do want to speak your truth or get a message across, like, just know that social media is it's so easy that match catches wind, and right, it just kind of takes off and takes on a shape of its own that's not your possible intention, right? And then people have to apologize for the tweet they just sent, right? Or try to take 100 steps back to make it make sense. So talking about communication where it's more personalized, friends, family, coworkers, strategies that could really help us hone and master the art of interpersonal communication, where can one begin?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I think it begins in many cases with asking questions. And so if you're in a situation, for instance, where you have different views, maybe it's about a political issue or some hot button thing with a friend or colleague, it's important to actually start from the point of understanding what your goal is. In some cases, I mean, you don't necessarily need to talk about everything with everyone. That's also the case. I mean, if you are my coworker that these days I'm seeing twice a week on Zoom meetings, and we're talking about the accounting reports. It's really just not that important in the scheme of things for us to litigate our differences about gun control or something like that. That's not relevant to the nature of our relationship. And so sometimes, feeling like I have to have it out with everybody, it's not the right move. We need to understand where it's going to be relevant and helpful. If it is an issue where it's salient to the relationship, it's not something that can be avoided without people feeling like, oh my gosh, I can't say anything around her. I have to be, I'm always on tenterhooks because I don't know what to say. Well, then in that case, it is important to probably bring it up. And we have to recognize that odds are you're not necessarily going to convert someone to your way of being. You want to think about what is an acceptable outcome. The ideal outcome might be, well, they say I'm right. It's probably not going to happen. And so what's the next best thing? Is it that you can agree to disagree? Is it that you just have a deeper understanding of what her perspective is and where she's coming from? And so therefore, even if you vehemently disagree, you can be more empathetic to her. Thinking that through is a useful first step in being able to engage with someone where your opinions are pretty different.
Yes, 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 yes. Like, what is the end game for people? I don't think people go into the conversation with ever going, what's my goal if I know this is going to have a conflicting opinion, right? You're a staunch Democrat, you're having a conversation with a staunch Republican. What's the goal of getting into the tit for tat, back and forth, he said, she said? Is it, can it just come from a place of understanding one's perspective, having empathy for somebody else views something? And you know what, to me, is one of the more disheartening and disappointing things from 2020 and all of the very intense opinions in the world is that it seems like it's harder for people to listen to others, right? If they are so hell-bent on their way or the highway, there's no talking to this person, to the point where people are losing relationships, jobs, friendships. And does that necessarily have to be? Because we do have the opportunity of freedom of choice and freedom of speech and freedom of expression in today's world. So it's like, where's the fine line between speaking and listening? And, do we need to focus on our listening techniques just as much as communicating?
Yeah, I mean, listening, of course, is really crucial because it's very easy, especially with heated issues, especially with things that, frankly, are physiologically triggering us. I mean, we've got the cortisol and the adrenaline and all the chemicals, and we're so ramped up that patiently listening is the last thing we want to do. We want to punch somebody. We don't want to sit there and be like, tell me your feelings. It's just not the biological state. So to the extent, I mean, and this is true about anything, whether you're talking about a political issue or whether you're just talking about a fight with your spouse or your partner, is if you're feeling riled up to the point where, your body is taking you hostage a little bit, anything you can do to calm that down, to ratchet it down so that, whether it's deep breathing or, taking 5 minutes and, shaking it off and coming back, those things are all helpful because you're essentially clearing the chemicals. You're physiologically getting yourself in a better state so that you're not feeling so defensive, or you're not feeling like you have to respond to every little thing, but instead you actually can be more thoughtful about listening. I think, the other issue, of course, is really understanding how much an issue is worth to you. And I will, say that in air quotes. It's true. There are some issues that are so important that you upon rational thought might say, yeah, that's a deal breaker. If someone disagrees with me, then I don't want them in my life. I
Right.
would also say I hope that those are not that many issues, because you won't have a lot of friends if you feel that way about 20 issues.
It's true.
Yeah,
It
so
is.
we have to choose.
And we sometimes we do have that bandwidth, I guess is the word, between our friendships, our romantic partners, right? Life partners. But where we might have to censor a little bit is in the workplace, right? Especially if you work with a larger team. More people, more opinions, right? So key techniques for getting our messages across effectively in the workplace, coming from our professional self. What are your top takeaways for really effective communication in the workplace? And maybe you're having current challenges with either your colleagues or your supervisor. Any techniques to share for that?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the first thing, of course, is the question that we have to navigate, and people might feel like it's complicated, although I think in practice, for most of us, it shouldn't be that complicated. But on one pole, everybody sort of knows, again, air quotes, don't talk about politics or don't talk about political issues at work. Just don't. And, it's not bad advice. However, on the other end of the spectrum is, but wait, aren't I supposed to bring my whole self to work? Aren't I supposed to express myself? What about the real me? What if it's really important to me? And so how do you navigate these two poles?
Mm,
And I think the rough rule of thumb that I would say is the following. Number one, bringing your whole self to work is great, but it also doesn't mean that you need to dwell on something excessively. And so going into any kind of a lengthy monologue, or, getting really fired up about something, that's probably more information than anyone needs. They don't want you to talk for, 15 minutes uninterrupted about buying a new blender, because that's boring. And similarly, they don't want you to go for 15 minutes about how much you hate the governor or whatever it is. But that being said, your colleagues also, if they are rational people, should be able to deal with it if you make a passing comment about something. Oh, well, what did you do last night, Dorie? Oh, well, I went to a fundraiser for a charity that does blah, blah, blah. How about you? A respectful colleague, even if they disagree with the goal of that charity, hopefully they're going to say, oh, okay, nice. Well, I got pizza last night, and you can move on from that. But I think the biggest distinction is just don't dwell too much, and largely you'll be okay.
yeah, exactly. And isn't it so funny how it's kind of like back to basics in our communication tactics and behaviors, right? If you have nothing nice to say, maybe don't say it. Oh my God, I'm totally blanking on this term, but don't call people mean names. There's a saying, and I'm blanking right now. Blame it on the pregnancy hormones. But yes, I mean, there are fundamental ways to avoid getting yourself in uncomfortable conversations. But what if someone's going off, right, and you're on the receiving end, right? So you're not the one delivering the sermon, but you're kind of stuck, and it's happening, and it's coming at you, and you have no idea how to get out of this conversation or remove your. What are some of the tactics for, kind of removing yourself from an uncomfortable confrontation or conversation?
Yeah. So I think sometimes people feel a little more freaked out than they should about this. Frankly, it's not that dissimilar from people, for instance, almost all of us have probably moderated meetings or led meetings, and someone's talking too long. Like they just won't stop. They just won't stop. And it's like, oh my gosh, Bob's been talking for 10 minutes here. Like, how do I shut him up? And at a certain point, you kind of have to jump in and just be like, thanks, Bob. Okay, that was great. And it's awkward because is Bob going to feel embarrassed, or is he going to feel shut up? Yes, he probably is. But also, sorry, Bob, you got to stop. So I think it's not dissimilar. So if somebody is, they have a rant, I think that there's a couple of factors, right? We can make a little chart here. One factor is how well you know that person, how close you are to that person. The second factor is how what is the setup, or what is the nature of the conversation? Is it just the two of you on a Zoom call? Is it a group meeting, etc.? And you can handle them in slightly different ways. If you are having a one-on-one with somebody and you know them really well, then you can probably just be honest. You can be like, Chelsea, I love you. I know how you feel, but like, let's talk about pizza instead. Like, just like, okay. And you can stop them that way. It's more awkward, of course, if you don't know them that well. It's easier if it's a group setting, because then you can probably make an excuse. There's 4 other people they can rant to, and you can say, sorry, the UPS man, and you log off or whatever. You can come up with something. If it's just the two of you, then honestly, I like to use humor to diffuse some of these things. I might, and does this make them mad? Maybe. This person's probably not going to be your friend, your super friend anyway, if you have diametrically opposed views. But if somebody's in the rant, I might just at a certain point where I get fed up, be like, you know what, Chelsea? Love that passion. That's amazing. Why don't we get back to talking about the agenda for the meeting, though? And just like, okay, let's redirect. And if they're reasonably self-aware, they might be like, oh, sorry, right. Oh yeah, we got to get to the meeting. And, if they're not, if they're, still a pit bull, well, frankly, there's probably something a little wrong with them. And you might need to talk to your manager and just be like, watch out for Chelsea. She just is like not shutting up. And yeah. That's what we got.
I really do like that. Just like, how can you go about redirecting where you're not offending or spotlighting or trying to embarrass, but kind of calling it like it is with something, maybe humorous or relevant to something going on in the situation, and redirect it back to the agenda at hand or the goal at hand. And in your interpersonal communication course on LinkedIn Learning, which is fantastic, everyone, if you're looking to kind of dive into, a deeper strategies with this for yourself, for your team, for your business, for your relationships. I do love a few of the elements that you tackle. So I'd love to just kind of get your even quick tip for each element here, because I think all 4 of these things are something that we have had. Every single person has probably experienced at least once, if not 100 million times in their life. For example, someone who just won't stop interrupting you. How do you go? What's your quick tip on, addressing something like that?
Yeah, well, I think also we need to kind of think about what's happening. Oftentimes the person is not actually aware that they're doing it. It's just a bad habit, and they don't want to. It's not, and again, there's some people who are being malicious about it, which is a different story. But in most cases, it's a bad habit. They're unaware. Maybe they're too excited. They're just like, oh, they're jamming on it. Or, maybe they're a little bit of a know-it-all. Who knows? But they're not deliberately trying to smash you in some way. And so the problem arises because, okay, they interrupt you once, fine, twice, fine. By the 3rd or 4th time, you're ready to throttle them. And so what tends to happen is that they do it a 5th time, and you're just like, oh my God, will you stop? And they're like, what did I do? Because they are clueless. So that's just suboptimal. So what we want to do is, before you get to that breaking point, to be mindful of that and actually just jump in, and you interrupt them back, and you say, hey, Chelsea, I love that question. I love that point. I think it will help the conversation if I can just lay out my points first before we get into that. Would you mind terribly if I just take 2 minutes here to lay out the whole scenario, and then we can go back to this? And usually they'll be like, oh, okay. Oh, sorry. And it's not a problem.
And really kind of just making them aware that they're doing it, and at the same time you expressing your goal, right? Finishing your agenda. So effective and so doable if we can be mindful of not feeling embarrassed in that moment or wanting to, charge at them in that moment, and instead take action in a proactive way in that moment. And that also comes to my next one of, responding to critical feedback or criticism, right? And that could kind of be polarizing and paralyzing to many of us if we don't know how to come back to criticism or critical feedback. Quick tips for that.
Sure. Well, I think the most important distinction to make up front is who is doing the criticizing, right? And do they have standing to do so? If they are your boss, well, then technically, yes, that's kind of their goal. Is they're supposed to be, theoretically nurturing you, developing you, helping make you better. And so their feedback is feedback you should be listening to. Also, if the person really is a genuine expert in the field, and especially if you have sought them out, if I say, hey, Chelsea, can I ask you some advice about personal branding? And then you tell me, and I'm just like, what? No, that's not true. Like, well, that's kind of ridiculous. Like, she knows what she's talking about. And I asked her, geez. So we need to be mindful of that. I think that the biggest distinction is that oftentimes, especially in the corporate world, you get people sometimes who have no standing and you didn't ask them, and they will give you feedback anyway. And that's the kind of thing that can often get under people's skin, really make them doubt themselves. It's like, oh my gosh, this person came up to me and she told me that my wardrobe was terrible. And what I think is really useful to do in a situation like that is actually to be kind of hostile because they shouldn't do that. If somebody's like, can I give you some feedback? It's really okay to just say, no, I'm good. Thanks. Just give them the brush back. Nobody should be giving unsolicited feedback. It's inappropriate.
That's, what? And I kind of was like, right, like you can just say no. I'm not interested in your feedback, or I don't even know if some people even realize that that's an option for themselves as well, which is so silly to say. But, we tend to be like, okay, and feel awkward instead.
Right. Those people deserve a brushback pitch. They need to be scolded. That's not an appropriate thing to do.
Right, especially when it's unsolicited, right? In my opinion, or if you want, it's like, well, I didn't ask for your opinion. Thank you, and I think, the most important one, just because it will help wrap up all of the, the advice and wisdom and insight provided within our conversation, is, communicating across cultures. To me, you could be a white female, you could be a black male, you could be an Asian male, but that doesn't mean you grew up in the same household, doesn't mean you follow the same traditions, doesn't mean you have the same cultural dynamics. So speaking across cultures today, we need to be mindful of this. So how do we approach communicating across cultures in the workplace, but also in life? Like I'm just gonna have you segment it for us. Are they the same? Are they different? What's your approach to this?
Yeah, this is not, it's not simple necessarily. There's a great saying which I really love and relate to, which is if you ask an American how they're doing, great means good. Good means fine, and fine means things are not fine.
Love it. So valid.
I think it's pretty valid. And, of course, if you're coming from another culture and you might speak perfect English and someone says, I'm fine, you're going to think, oh, great, they're fine. And it's like, no, that's actually a warning sign. So there's things that just, you kind of can't know unless you're really immersed in it. It's very subtle. And so, going back to a theme, first of all, we need to be conscious of not blaming people when they misunderstand, if it is in fact a legitimate difference of understanding. And also, we need to be more conscious of what we are doing and saying. I have a hard time, I think probably a lot of people do, when I'm actually saying things, of not speaking. I mean, Americans speak very idiomatically. We've got all these expressions and things like that. It's hard not to say it. But the part that is less hard, and this is where I try to essentially correct myself, is as soon as I've said it, I try to sort of scan it and analyze it and realize, is there anything confusing here in this? And I remember one example. I was giving a lecture in Switzerland, and somebody asked a question, and I said, well, that's a can of worms. And I just thought about it. I'm like, oh, they are really confused right now. And so I'm like, and by a can of worms, that is a metaphor that means blah, blah, blah. I'm like, okay, we just have to understand where are the places we might be losing people, and as best we can to try to correct it and make it clear and transparent.
Absolutely. And, before I wrap up, I always like to say, because there's so many different tidbits and takeaways, over the past 35 minutes together. But, is there that one thing, Dorie, that if only people did this more, if only we, if only we did this more, if only we knew this or practiced it right, it would just be easier to communicate across cultures. It would just be easier to tackle tricky situations. It would just be easier to communicate, period, in life. Is there that one thing that we didn't, pinpoint, or that you want to reinforce?
Well, I think one simple thing, I run a weekly interview show, which is on Thursdays. And I just interviewed a gentleman named William Green, who wrote a book called Richer, Wiser, Happier. And it is a book looking at the investing strategies of the world's greatest investors and how you can apply it to life. And of course, he wrote about Charlie Munger, who is Warren Buffett's business partner. And Charlie Munger is famous for his philosophy that the best way to be successful, it's not really to strive for success. It is to strive to avoid being stupid. And so he just tries to root out any mistakes that are stupid. And he figures if he can do that, he's going to be ahead of almost anybody. And because so many people make stupid mistakes. So one small example of a way to not be stupid is anytime you have what I will call sensitive communication. And how do you know it's sensitive? Well, I'll tell you, it's that you're upset about it. You feel nervous. You have a stomach ache. You're like, oh, I don't know what to say. Oh, I'm stressed out. Like when you feel that, it is therefore sensitive communication. And I would recommend that you have a trusted friend read whatever you are planning to send before you send it. Literally a couple of days ago, I had a friend who were working on a project together. She drafted an email about this project, which had hit a snag, and she sent it to me. And I was glad she sent it to me because I edited her draft. And then she sent me a text message and she said, "Thank you for taking the hostility out of my email."
It's so true. It's amazing what another set of eyes could identify as hostile or maybe not necessary before you just hit send, right? And thank you to my husband. He does that for me quite often with clients. So that is really such a great way to just also kind of cover your back, right, with someone that you trust, and that's someone that won't, be offended by your email or potential hostility of, really just thinking before you post, thinking before you tweet, thinking before you send. And if it's giving you that agita feel, then having someone comb through it for you, that's trusted. Great, great, great thing to do. So Dorie, thank you so much. We talked a lot of content from Dorie's 2 courses, Strategic Thinking and Interpersonal Communications, live on LinkedIn Learning right now if you want to go dive in more. But I also hear that you have something very exciting coming up this September. Tell us about what's going on.
I do. Thank you so much, Chelsea. One of my exciting projects is that September 21st of 2021, my new book is coming out. It is called The Long Game: How to Be a Long-Term Thinker in a Short-Term World. It is available now for pre-order. And if anyone wants to learn more about it, you can just go to dorieclark.com/longgame.
Love that. Because so many people are looking to be like the overnight success or the YouTube sensation. But I'm always talking to clients about how do you want to create sustainable, scalable impact versus that crash and that rise to the top and crash um, uh, outcome instead, right? Because everyone's kind of looking for that instant gratification, that quick fix versus the long game, which is success today, right? Long-term, sustainable, scalable success that you want to pat yourself on the back for because you're proud of how you did it and where you got to. So I'm looking forward to looking into the long game for pre-order, also coming out 9/21/21. That's pretty easy to remember. Dorie, thank you so much for joining me. It was such a pleasure having you. I love this conversation. I feel like, we all need to be just mindful of all the elements within this live stream. So thank you for reinforcing them for us today.
Chelsea, thank you so much. What a treat to get to speak with you.
Have a good one, everybody. We'll see you here on the C-Suite next Thursday. And for more on Dorie Clark, all things Dorie Clark, correct, for social channels and website?
It sure is. Yeah. dorieclark.com and Dorie Clark on pretty much all the channels.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Dorie. Bye, everyone. Have a great rest of the